New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community. Proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Today, we're with Stephen Phillips. Welcome along to the podcast, Stephen. How are you?
Very good, thanks, Paul.
Excellent. Maybe you can remind listeners, it's been a little while since you've been on the show, and I think things have changed a little bit, so maybe you can fill people in on where you fit into this big wide world of tech.
Yeah, I was in the world of cloud native sort of observability data with Sumo Logic, and then took a bit of a pivot into the enterprise world, working in the financial sector as a chief information security officer, and had some great experiences and all there, building out a great cyber team and all for the company I was working with. And just very recently I've pivoted back towards working basically out how can I provide value to New Zealand businesses sort of better in the cybersecurity space. So looking at advisory type stuff and also a number of sort of entrepreneurial sort of startup type opportunities. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Excellent. Well, great to have you back on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. A big thank you to our show partners, Vocus, Vodafone, Spark, Datacom, Palo Alto Networks, HP, Gorilla Technology, and Umbrella Connect. Well, let's delve into the news. I saw, looking at Business Desk, that TikTok has recently jumped into, I guess, going through the hoops to set up a New Zealand presence, getting a legal entity set up, which I thought, oh, this is interesting because it was only. Last year really we were hearing that TikTok were going to be banned from US, and then there was maybe going to be this sort of sale to Microsoft.
Larry was going to buy it,
and then Larry Ellison, Oracle, and maybe they were going to buy it. It was going to be split up, and there's all sorts sort of going on, and at that time we delved into. Some work a few cybersecurity folks had been doing to sort of delve in, having decompiled the app code, and it wasn't looking like the safest place to be in terms of a few aspects that were noticed behind the scenes, and sort of a lack of encryption of certain data that was flowing around the place. Now we seem to have moved on a lot from there. But still, we've got there are, I guess, a Chinese based and owned company that have one app that sort of targets the Chinese market. ByteDance have that one app, and then they've got TikTok for the rest of the world. Setting up in New Zealand, a New Zealand entity, does that change things from your perspective?
Well, on one hand, if a company is actually registering locally, you're hoping they're going to be a good tax citizen, and so that would be the benefits of doing that. And obviously, if they're incorporating locally, that also makes them subject to the Privacy Act in New Zealand. So you're hoping that it's for all of the right reasons, but you've also got to look at, is this part basically of the Digital Silk Road type initiative? So there's all sorts of different ways you could spin this, and I'm not close enough to it really to have an informed opinion. But I'm hoping they're going to be a good tax citizen, and they're going to keep privacy very seriously.
Well, we've obviously got our new privacy legislation in New Zealand. Since late 2020, there's not really any teeth to it, though, is there? So if there's, I guess, people could attract attention for, falling foul of the rules to one degree or another, but there's not too much pain other than sort of negative media coverage, is there? It's not huge fines or things, is there?
On a global basis, a couple of $100,000 doesn't mean anything to a lot of these sort of global media sort of companies. So yeah, it doesn't have teeth from that perspective. But certainly reputation damage. But unless a government's going to step in to actually do something to mitigate that,
And how much does reputation damage sort of play out? We look at all the different cybersecurity incidents and privacy things, and it seems like most often there can be a bit of a hit, but things seem to get back to normal quite quickly. Like I called up the government health line about something, and they very quickly were saying, well, what's your birth date? And I said, well, I wouldn't trust giving my birth date to you unless I have a real need that to give you that. I'm asking for some generic information, and we know how certain entities end up losing this information. So no, you can't have that. But we move on very, very quickly, generally speaking, and you forget that a lot of data has been leaked through varying things, and certainly the general public up here too.
Yeah, well, you take Zoom. Before the pandemic, there was a lot of people actually saying, they didn't have end-to-end encryption and all those types of things. And there was a lot of questions being asked, and governments were saying, not on our watch yet. It's now being used basically as the vehicle basically for communications across sort of multiple governments. The US, Germany, and a number of other sort of countries have actually sort of fully embraced it. So, companies do move on, and I'm hoping that maybe TikTok's sort of going in that direction as well, and all is good, and it's not anything other than that.
All right. We'll see how these things play out.
Yes.
Now, Unimarket, which is a New Zealand software marketplace aggregator, they have sold a majority stake to US private equity firm Accel KKR, 75% of the business. It seems like this is to, in part, I think some of their shareholders, some of the early shareholders will exit, but bringing in a chunk of funds into the business. You've had some interactions with them. What can you tell us about what they do?
Yeah, so I had the great opportunity to work with Peter Kane, sort of probably going back now three and a bit years, when they were primarily in the education sort of sector and doing some great things around procurement solutions and all for education sector, but they were starting to pivot obviously into financial and looking to move into government procurement and the likes. So this will be a great opportunity for them to actually really sort of enter markets and also pivot a bit in terms of maybe the sectors that they're able to target, and maybe look at broader functionality, maybe mature out subscription-based sort of procurement or other things. So great opportunities for Peter and the team at Unimarket. Great company and some really innovative people, and it's a great New Zealand story.
And it says they've got. I think what I was seeing a reference to about 45 staff at the moment. Yeah. This obviously facilitates further investment into people, and predominantly New Zealand based, which is great.
Well, that's almost doubled, I think, really in the last 3 years, because I think it was probably closer to around the 20 staff back 3 years ago. So it's good to see that they're growing.
And $4 billion. That's they've transacted through their platform over the last year. So it's pretty impressive. Yeah,
and they have a model basically of similar to the Stripe with a subscription fee and a percentage basically on the money through the market. So I'm sure they've probably got other models as well, but very very flexible sort of piece of software, and it's kind of great to see another New Zealand sort of ISV basically doing well basically on the global stage. We've seen a lot of that recently.
It's great to see our software firms doing well, and the long may it continue, I say.
Absolutely. At the beginning of the pandemic, sort of everyone was sort of like shuttering the doors a bit and trying to weather for the storm. But I think the New Zealand ISVs have actually done remarkably well. Actually, if you look at actually just the number of sort of acquisitions and all that have happened in the last sort of 6 months or so.
Yep. In fact, it reminds me we need to get a bit of time delving into Vend and the story there from Vaughan and the team. So that's one of those software sales that I think it'd be great to hear a bit of the backstory on.
Yeah.
Now there was a little outage in January that hit some government websites, and I saw this being picked up. I think it was Newsroom who wrote a little headline today titled "Government Didn't Report Possible Hack." That sort of just jumped out to me as being, I don't know, sort of quite, clickbaity, and just didn't seem like the right sort of thing to be saying around this outage. I think there was a window of time where they didn't necessarily understand the full details of what happened, but it was 76 minutes, mid-January. Where some things weren't working as they should. Should an entity be reporting something when they're not even sure that it's a cybersecurity incident and putting that out there in the public? Is this normal?
Well, attribution does take a lot of time, and there's a lot of work to go through forensics to actually get to the bottom of these things. But I remember this actually when it was occurring, and certainly my sources didn't indicate that there was anything sort of untoward going on in terms of any form of breach at the time. My understanding was that it was more of a service configuration sort of issue, not necessarily a data breach. But sometimes it takes many months, if not years, for all of the detail to come out, because forensics is inherently difficult to achieve, and attribution even more so. So, maybe this company doing the reporting has actually got some sort of secret inside scoop, but it certainly hasn't come out basically in the the security apparatus sort of people that I've been working with in the last sort of year or so.
Well, I mean, the article that was published seemed to point it back to that. It was all quite, clear where the issues happened, and that there's not actually a cyber security incident, and so that the headlines seem a bit disingenuous to sort of pull people in on that.
Indeed,
basis.
and the government with the Reserve Bank. With the cyber resilience sort of guidelines, are starting to have conversations with regulated entities around compelling, basically, disclosure of cyber breaches, cyber incidents. And I think it is a good thing that organisations actually are held accountable for improving the cyber resilience of us as a country. So I think it's a good thing, and both government entities as well as private sort of entities should be subject to this type of a thing, because it can only actually help us as a nation.
Yeah, I mean, we need to keep stepping up, and these things have to be ultimately come out, but how and when those things are reported, it needs to be done in a responsible and appropriate manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't necessarily need to report something that was actually never a cyber incident.
I'd like to know basically what the source is, and before you can actually determine whether it's credible or not. So.
One of the just looking at local things, mobile virtual network operators. We've when I've sort of looked around the world, there's quite often quite a number of these entities, and in the US, some of them have actually got they're quite big mobile brands that they didn't actually have their own network behind them, and some of those brands actually will work with multiple carriers, and they've a few different sort of approaches. But here in the New Zealand market, it's never really, they've never really gained too much traction other than Skinny, which when you look at Skinny, it's yes, it is a virtual network, but it's another brand within Spark's world. So they've sliced off and created a brand that, in my understanding, was really developed to head 2 degrees off at the pass, right?
It's the Procter and Gamble approach. Have multiple brands basically on the shelf, right? So yeah.
And they seem to have done reasonably well on that basis in terms of I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but certainly it hasn't stopped 2 degrees in their tracks. In fact, I was with 2 degrees. Was it Monday mornings? They've opened their new premises on Fanshawe Street in Auckland. Very flash new space where they can house about 600 people, and they shared they're now up to 1.6 million customers. Across their network, and of course they're more than just mobile these days, with being an internet service provider for a good number of years. It looked like they're doing all right based on their fancy new premises and their new positioning in the city.
Hopefully they're going to be investing again in their staff, because certainly at the beginning of the pandemic there was a few nervous telco operators out. So
Yes.
given that people are investing in fancy new premises, hopefully they're investing in sufficient staff as well. So. Yeah, but I think MVNO has been around for more than 20 years in New Zealand, and the traction just hasn't happened. And I think some of it comes down to basically it's how do you take care of your customers, and as soon as you're actually effectively providing a virtual service, the MVNO operator's actually got to provide the actual front level of service, and they don't necessarily have access to all of the tools to do it efficiently. So sometimes you end up basically with a drop basically in service levels that is reflected in net promoter scores and those types of things. So, and people vote with their feet. So if you can't actually provide that great sort of customer experience, you're not going to be able to grow your customer base, which then leads to churn. So that's I think why we're really in this part of the market. Basically, you're only 70,000 odd subscribers, and you haven't seen them grow like in the US markets. Maybe where some of the providers have been able to invest more in automation to make sure that the actual experience is at least on par, or if not better.
There's the Commerce Commission's report. A few months ago, they highlighted, putting Skinny aside, but Compass, Kogan Mobile, Trust Power, Vocus, and Warehouse Mobile had a combined 1.4% sort of market share, but under 90,000 subscribers basically. So it's quite a small slice. I did wonder whether Warehouse Mobile might get a bit of traction, because what I've noticed in the US is some of their big box sort of retailers and so on would really push these different offerings, and so you'd go into a retailer like just trying to think of Walmart style retailer anyway, and they would have all the handsets on display, and then they would have all these different offerings they would have the direct mobile operators like the AT&T, but they'd also have those sort of mobile virtual network operator options, and so you could buy whichever plan from whichever was kind of the best deal, and so those were a really big way in which these virtual network operators get pushed. But in New Zealand, you don't see much. In fact, Kogan, I think, was the most recent one Kogan Mobile to come into the market, and Kogan in Australia are something of a I guess an online retailer, a local Australian kind of competitor to the likes of an Amazon. In fact, last year they bought up Mighty Ape here in New Zealand, and they seem to have built up enough traction as a brand that they're doing reasonably well in Australia. But it seems they've struggled to do much here because I guess they don't have market share.
Yeah, it might be a question for Tony to answer. What's happening with MVNO? Is the level of service basically that an MVO gets basically the same basically as the primary operator's sort of service, or is there degradation or quality of service issues sort of as you get out of the urban areas?
Well, we might have that one for Tony Beard when he's on the show next time, because I guess Kogan sits on top of Vodafone's network. Mm-hmm. And I seem to remember when sort of reading their terms and details online, it all sort of pushed sort of straight back to Vodafone. So it may well be very closely coupled with Vodafone and just using Vodafone's customer service, or it may be more tightly back to
not sure on the details.
Dr. Kogan. So that would be interesting to get a bit more of an understanding on. But it does leave is it leaves us with a somewhat less competitive market if those virtual network operators aren't really gaining much traction. Then there isn't too much need for our other mobile brands to maybe be a little bit more competitive at times.
Yeah, well, I know at one point I thought, if you can aggregate all of your bills, your gas, your electricity, your fixed broadband and your mobile all onto one bill, you can actually have a lot simpler life. But we just haven't seen basically the uptake of that type of a model. Whether it's for economic reasons or quality of service reasons, unsure. I'd like to find out.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be Trustpower have gained the most traction in terms of really bringing together power and internet service. But adding in more than that doesn't seem to have really
it hasn't taken off.
Been a thing here. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out. In fact, I remember hearing. Maybe it's somebody at Samsung, because they do the partnership with Trustpower and give away the free TVs and free, bits and pieces. Of course, you do pay for it; it's built into the pricing in there. I got the impression that Trustpower was the biggest, or certainly one of the biggest. Channels through which Samsung product is certainly the TVs sort of sells into the New Zealand market. So it's obviously worked very well for both parties there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now on to slightly beyond New Zealand's shores, Afterpay. An Australian company, although they're certainly very active here and involved in the New Zealand market too. In fact, very much a global company. Have had their shareholders have had an incredible payday. Square have bought them, which of course a payments company founded by Twitter's Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
$29 billion is what we understand that sale works out at, around a little over 41 billion New Zealand dollars. So this is a huge validation that this model that we didn't have, certainly didn't have it 10 years ago. I think it's about seven years since, or is it even less than that? Since Afterpay, started in the market. I think 2014 was when they started. And this seems to be the thing that younger generation is more interested in terms of a way of paying for things that they maybe don't have the cash right now, rather than moving into credit cards.
Yeah, and I think you're going to find some of the more traditional, the card providers, like the MasterCard sort of providers of like Q MasterCard and Gem and all of those other traditional providers are going to really struggle unless they can actually find ways to innovate. And I think, the Afterpay model, it's effectively the retailers taking the clip basically for providing basically that revenue stream, and it does make it easier, especially younger people, as you say, who want to actually want the value now, but they want to pay later. But they've probably heard from their parents basically in times gone by, don't get caught up putting stuff on your credit card, and this doesn't sound like a credit card to them, so it's game on. So these business to business, sort of business to consumer sort of payment providers, I think, are going to become more and more prevalent basically as some of the globals start sort of getting into the market. So the likes of Google, the likes of Amazon and Apple, as they start actually bringing their products into international markets, it's going to get really interesting. But I think Afterpay's actually made some great traction in this market, and we're just going to see more and more of this, I think, going forward, because it's really an arms race basically to control payments. And you've got companies like Xero who have got a multi-billion-dollar payments business for B2B. So disaggregating or disintermediating basically the traditional, the trading and the card providers is going to be something that we're going to see a lot more of.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of interesting things still to kind of happen in the market when it comes to financial tech and new business models and changes. Even though when you have maybe a closer look at the likes of Afterpay, and we've got also firms here like Lay-By out of New Zealand and others that have entered into this space. When you sort of break it down, they're not necessarily a million miles away from the credit card scenario. There's a period in which you pay it off slightly differently, and sort of weekly, fortnightly chunks depending on the provider, and then they charge you fees if you're late with it, right?
Correct.
So quite credit card like.
Yeah, well, they're pitching the 4 payments basically interest free. Are the words, and that's very compelling for somebody if they can actually put it across 4 paydays or 2 paydays or whatever it is. It sounds compelling, but it's generally the merchant that's actually picking up that cost of money, and then they stand to gain basically when someone defaults. So it does come back to a credit card model pretty much.
It's going to be very interesting to see how these things evolve, and then where over time do we land in terms of cryptocurrencies? Do they actually become sort of real currencies? Whereas at the moment it's a place more often than not it's about speculating on what they might do in the future. Rather than being something that we use. I have actually made a payment. I think it was Red Rooster in Australia, where I was able to go in and pay with my cryptocurrency. I think I had to stand there and sort of drum my fingers for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes while the transaction actually went through and so on, which was pretty funny. But it was it was cool to actually get a handle on what the reality was and what the challenges are with crypto in terms of actually making payments. But there's a whole lot of possibilities there too.
Not enough crypto miners stood up at the back end basically to process your transaction fast. Anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. Pretty impressive payday anyway for Afterpay. And I see that the US is actually starting to make moves basically towards basically regulating the cryptocurrency sort of world. So I think we're going to see some interesting moves basically from governments in terms of how they regulate the payments sort of market, the crypto markets, and the traditional banks.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly we have very strong rules as far as anti-money laundering is concerned. and so crypto, there has to be some sort of crossover for
Correct.
governments not to want to make life very, very difficult. So
there's an obligation to know your customer, and certainly the cyber sort of people like the NSA and the likes basically have been able to sort of intercept some of these crypto sort of currencies being used for ransom payments of late. So there's certainly some really interesting things happening in that space.
Yeah. I would love to know a little bit more. Around what maybe goes on behind the scenes there. Now, one more thing that I wanted to chat about today is a new product from Microsoft, their new virtual PC, their new virtual computer. Now, I'm not talking about the virtual PC product Microsoft acquired, what was it, 15 20 years ago, something a long time ago. Yeah. I'm talking about, I guess to a degree, this is a new marketing spin because you've been able to get a virtual computer from Microsoft in their Azure cloud for a considerable period of time. But by launching this product with this Windows 365 branding, and look, it's been a few weeks since they announced it. But today it is available officially here in the New Zealand market. You can buy it. We've got all the pricing plans clearly aimed at business because there are two options: the business or the enterprise version. They exclude GST. They've got a starting point here in the New Zealand market of $45.40 per user per month. There is a lower based fee for those who have already have a license or a subscription that gives them Windows hybrid benefit. That's a little bit lower, $37.80. But the thing to note, that sounds like quite a tempting price point to be able to get a virtual computer in the cloud, is that's a very low end configuration with one virtual CPU or virtual processor, 2 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigs of storage. So probably a lower spec device than anyone would expect to operate on. I guess what's sort of becoming more the norm these days for a base level computer is a quad core machine with 8 to 16 gigs of RAM and so on. So that price point for a quad core machine on their business one starts at 132 New Zealand dollars, 16 gigs of RAM, 128 storage. So there's lots of these things online. We'll try and put a link into the show notes up at nztechpodcast.com if you want to go and find this, because don't go and Google it and expect to be able to find this result, because you'll get much the same as when Microsoft launched Microsoft 365. And the Google results would just show you all the old Microsoft Office 365 results. And that was exactly what happened after Microsoft alerted me today to, hey, it's out, it's public. Yeah. And I went to Google straight away and searched for Windows 365. And I did not get anything about Windows 365. I got something about the Microsoft 365 plans. So we will share that link. Their enterprise plans are naturally at sort of higher price points, depending on what you want. I think actually no, because with the enterprise, I think you already have to have the subscription piece. So it actually may not make any. So I don't think technically that it's necessarily anymore. Having a quick look through the pricings, but what do you think about this stuff? Because it opens up some interesting possibilities if this sort of becomes a mainstream way of operating, and each organisation needs to weigh up the costs and how that plays out. But some interesting possibilities in terms of how this might get used.
Yeah, well, I think for small, medium businesses, it's how do you remove the complexity of all of the the truck rolls or the remote support sort of issues basically that a Windows desktop can actually have, and if you can take away a lot of that complexity, whilst at the same time making sure it's patched, and you've got a curated set of applications. That are uniquely differentiated from what you can get basically on, say, like an iPad or something like that from, the Office 365 sort of suite. Then I think it's got some compelling sort of propositions for the business, because it then means that they can avoid all of the back end costs that you would typically have to do to actually set up physical servers in your data centers and all those types of things. So if you can defray all of that complexity and just turn it into a consumption based sort of model, a lot of benefit. Especially if businesses want to start sort of pivoting towards bring your own device and if they can actually start separating, the business experience that a user needs with their business applications and separating that from the device where the person's got their own, personal experience for browsing and watching Netflix and all those types of things. If they can do that in a secure way and take away the complexity of actually that remote support, I think there could be some good things here. They are going to have to, of course, sort of address how do I print and how do I work when I'm offline, and I'm suspecting that might come basically as a phase 2, and it's going to be interesting to see sort of whether as Microsoft with Azure starts sort of investing in the DCs in New Zealand, whether there's benefits of actually running this out of the New Zealand data centres sort of in the next year, 1 to 2 years. So
yeah, well, you would imagine that it would certainly operate at its best when it's operating from a local local data centre, and so the closer that data centre is to you, the better. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a wait there for that to be available locally. What's the can you remember the date when?
I think it's somewhere 2023. Hope maybe earlier. It'd be great if it is.
I was thinking next year.
I think it's late, probably next year if it is. But the difference between a 5 millisecond sort of responsiveness and a 30, 40 milliseconds sort of worth of round trip responsiveness could be all the difference. And I know we've got good UFB and 4G. 5G capabilities here, but it is going to make the whole experience a lot more snappy, because a lot of people with VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, still really, really struggle, basically, even in corporate sense, where they've spent millions of dollars in the back end.
Yes.
If you get it wrong, the experience is actually very wrong. So they've got to get it right.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to how this plays out. I imagine to start with, there'll be certain scenarios where it becomes that's a great
use
great
cases.
fit. But probably for the majority of the market in the early days, I would imagine it's not going to be at the top of people's lists, and as time goes on and they develop it, and I guess the value will probably improve over time. But the fact that Microsoft are packaging this up as a bulk offering to the market, they're not doing that lightly. They're obviously very much expecting to get a pretty reasonable amount of uptake, I would imagine.
Well, you've got to have that instant on experience. So as soon as you double click the app, it's got to be like an app basically working on your mobile device. It's got to be you've got to be able to type and interact with it like literally within a second or so. And with the back end and low latency, that type of experience is definitely possible now.
Well, you can imagine the types of ways in which people will access this cloud-based computer. My Samsung TV at home, I'm pretty sure you could probably plug a keyboard and mouse into it, because there is a remote desktop capability built into the TV. There's no reason why these USB-C docking monitors that we have today couldn't actually probably have that capability also built in. They've often got Ethernet jack, and certainly room to plug in keyboard and mouse and so on. There's a bit of smarts in there. There's firmware that needs updating and so on. So the monitor could have the capability where just a slightly smarter monitor than your base one has all of the smarts. Our Samsung phones, today, USB-C in, everything comes up, full screen, keyboard and mouse support. It's really probably just the iPhone that maybe isn't catered to now for being able to enable this stuff. And you could probably have a little very cheap dongle that could be taken around and
do your two-factor. Yeah, well, it starts changing the economics, because at the desktop level, if your TV might be $500, and TVs are quite reasonable monitors these days, and versus an entry-level laptop is probably, for a business, is still $1,500. So $2,000 down to $500 is actually a reasonable amount of capital. And if you've got 100 people in your business, basically that's capital you're not having to spend anymore. And you've also probably done away with the 3-year refresh cycle, basically, of a lot of that hardware. So there's certainly economic gains, especially if you can actually improve the security at the same time.
Yeah. Oh well, interesting times ahead. Well, great to catch up, Stephen.
Thanks, Paul.
And we'll look forward to hearing a bit more about the new things that you delve into over time. And thanks everybody for listening in to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Again, we'll be back again next week. So see you then. Cheers.
New Zealand's Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.